ItsNoBeez. No, this I'm watching right now. This I'm watching right
I
now.
couldn't live with myself if I let this beautiful family leave Chicago without sampling one of my personal favorite dishes, Pequod's deep dish.
No. Oh, you did not hear me say that.
Manja, baby.
Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to Binging with Babish, where this week we're taking a look at the Pequod's deep dish pizza from maybe my favorite episode of The Bear. Now, Pequod's makes their tomato sauce from fresh tomatoes. So I got about 10 medium tomatoes on the vine that I'm cutting a shallow cross into the bottom of before dunking into a big pot of boiling water for about 30 seconds. Once you see the skins start to split, it's time to fish them out and dunk them into a bowl of ice water. This is going to make the skins very, very easy to peel, which we're going to want to do because tomato skins, after being cooked for a while, turn into these nasty little curly things. Then we're giving everybody a rough chop. Chicago-style tomato sauce is usually pretty chunky, and headed over to the stovetop where we're going to cook the tomatoes in a big old pot with a splash of olive oil. I'm going to lightly season the tomatoes with salt, just a little bit to help draw out their moisture, and then Pequod's utilizes fresh basil. I'm going to throw a stem in there.
Played Diaz a lot of times, packed them up quite a bit.
1 teaspoon of each. Then this guy's simmering for an indeterminate period of time.
Tomatoes are ass? No, tomatoes are good, like,
nice
foundation to
tomato
sauces.
sauce we're pretty much done.
Salsa.
But my tomatoes might not have been the reddest in the world.
Ketchup.
So I'm gonna cheat by adding a tube of tomato paste to make it look more like tomato
Diced tomatoes
sauce,
are
less
nice
like
on
carrot
things.
sauce. This is also going to help deepen the flavor. Set that aside because now it's time
Pico.
to talk pans. Pequod's uses what look like aluminum pans,
Pizza
heavily
sauce.
seasoned with layer after layer of burnt-on cheese.
What is the Bear,
and oil,
though?
giving it non-stick properties and better browning capability. So we're going to imitate that by seasoning our pan the same way we would cast iron. Coat it all over with a thin layer of vegetable oil and place it upside down in a 450-degree Fahrenheit oven for 1 hour. This is going to make a tacky layer of polymerized oil on the outside of the pan. While it's still warm, hit it with another layer of oil and back into the oven for an hour, repeating as necessary. I went for 4 coats, which gave my pan a well-defined patina. Definitely not as jet black as the ones used at the restaurant, but hopefully it will do the trick. Next up, the dough. We're starting with 350 grams of all-purpose flour, combining it in the bowl of a stand mixer with 1.5 teaspoons each, sugar and kosher salt, 7.5 grams of active dry yeast, and then Pequod's uses barley malt flour. I've got 35 grams here, adding that to the party, whisking until homogeneous, and then adding the wet stuff, 225 ml of room temperature water and 60 ml of vegetable oil. Affix dough hooks and gently mix for 2 minutes until no dry patches remain and the dough is clearing the side of the bowl. Then we're gonna, oh my god, I almost forgot. Pequod's puts ground pepper directly into their dough. I'm adding about 3/4 of a teaspoon. Normally you'd add this at the dry ingredients stage, but no harm done. Now it's time to knead for 7 to 8 minutes until a smooth, supple, soft, tacky, and slightly sticky dough forms. I was gonna shape it on a floured surface, but as you can see, it works a little bit better with no flour whatsoever, stretching it into a tight ball and plopping it into a well-lubricated bowl, where it's going to rise under cover of plastic wrap for 45 minutes to 1 hour, until roughly doubled in size and ready to be turned into Chicago-style pizza. We're hitting our pan with 1 more coat of oil for good luck, then dropping in the dough and pressing it into a flat, even surface, taking care to pop any errant bubbles and releasing any trapped air pockets. It's a pretty workable dough, so it shouldn't give you too much of a fight, but if it does, just cover it and let it rest for another 20 minutes. Now we come to the sticky situation of cheese, and I do mean sticky, because Pequod's shingles slices of low-moisture, full-fat mozzarella right up against the sides of the pan to achieve their signature caramelized cheese crust. Once we've formed a formidable bowl of cheese, we're going to ladle in about 1 cup of sauce, spreading it evenly, and then sprinkling generously over top with pre-grated Romano cheese. This guy's headed into a 450-degree Fahrenheit oven on a pizza steel for 30 to 35 minutes until it looks like this. Unfortunately, this is where my problems began. Not only was the cheese positively glued to the sides of the pan, but the whole pizza collapsed down to nearly its original pre-oven height, which resulted in a dense, gummy crust, which at the time I thought was due to underbaking. So one problem at a time, let's start with the crust. I wanted to see if a non-stick pan would improve the situation, so I made a tiny little test pizza, but I had the same problem. Even in non-stick, the cheese was so stuck I had to destroy the pan just to get the pizza out. So I decided to spend the weekend repeatedly seasoning the aluminum pan. Over 2 days, I applied 16 coats of polymerized oil in the hopes that it would capture some of that Pequod's magic. The result was a pervasive smell of smoking oil and a beautiful, shimmering, jet black non-stick surface. Let's see if this can do the job a little better. Same recipe, this time baked at 425 for 45
Bro, made this shit like 3 times now?
Look at that pizza wants to jump out of that pan. But you can imagine my heartbreak when the pizza once again sunk like quicksand. I even threw it back in the oven for 10 minutes in the hopes that it would catch the dough before collapsing too badly, but even after almost an hour in the oven, it stood no chance. After doing a little research, I found out that diastatic malt powder can cause breads to collapse, so I subbed it out for more flour, and in place of the sugar, I'm adding the same amount by weight of barley malt syrup, hoping that this would bring some of the flavor and color without that sinking feeling. I gave it the same treatment and methodology as the other pizzas, brought the temperature back up to 450 and baked for 35 minutes. And upon removal, I was elated to see that it was standing up tall and staying there. Now, as badly as I want to cut myself a steaming, melty slice of this stuff, it is the day before this episode premieres, and I have to preserve it for the Michelin-starred donut presentation. So after letting it cool for about 15 minutes in the pan and then 15 minutes out of the pan, I'm using a biscuit cutter to excise pizza cylinders, which unfortunately revealed that the malt syrup did its job a little too well, giving me a light, airy crumb that's supposed to be kind of dense and almost chewy. So I had one last shot
doesn't even
going back to the barley malt
don't even
flour
look
at
like
a much
pizza.
lower ratio, 5.5 grams of malt flour to 378
There's too much
grams
dough.
of flour. This caused a little bit of cave-in, which is absolutely fine. Pequod's itself has a similarly concave shape. After finally digging it out of the pan and cutting myself a few rounds, I was delighted to see that the ideal texture had been achieved. A crumb that's open and airy, but also soft and moist, almost like the inside of a bagel. For
That's just like a
reference, here's the two
biscuit with
crumbs,
pizza on
the malt
top.
syrup on the left and the barley malt flour on the right. Pretty amazing what only 5.5 grams of the stuff can do. So now that we finally got our Pequods perfected, it's time to cut out our rounds, which maddeningly leave out the best part, the crunchy caramelized cheese crust. But we gotta be show accurate, so we're placing these on a sheet tray and flash them under the broiler for just a little bit until the cheese is remelted and they're nice and crispy. But first, earlier in the day, we have to prepare the basil gel. I have 60 grams of fresh basil that I'm gonna blanch for about 15 seconds before fishing out and immediately plunging into an ice bath that's gonna help preserve the basil's color. Pat dry, and then over on the stovetop, I'm taking 300 milliliters of that basil blanching liquid, adding 40 grams of sugar and 4 sheets of gelatin that have bloomed in some cold water for about 10 minutes. Squeezing dry, add
Ew.
them to the still hot water, at least 120 degrees Fahrenheit, tiny whisk until fully dissolved, then pour into the jar of a high-powered blender along with the blanched basil. Blend on high speed for about 1 minute until the basil is completely obliterated. Make sure not to overblend, otherwise you might lighten the color too much. Pass it through a fine mesh sieve to catch all the particulate, cover and fridge this mixture for at least 4 hours or until set. Then the resultant sort of basil jello is headed back into the blender, where we're going to blend it on high speed for 10 to 15 seconds until liquidus. Then we're going to make a big old mess as we try to get it into a squeeze bottle and keep this stuff cool until ready to use. Flash forward to our pizza donuts headed out from under the broiler, nicely crisped and melty and ready to plate. Arrange the pizza donuts in a sort of sitting circle around the pizza donut holes, then festoon generously with micro basil, applied of course with chef's tweezers. Then we're haphazardly dotting the plate with the basil gel. I didn't have a plate as big as the one they used in the show. Forgive me if this doesn't look 100% accurate. Drizzle with high quality olive oil, and there you have it. Pizza in the style of Pequods, in the style of Ever Chicago. But how's it taste? And I gotta say, fruit
I'm sure it tastes
aside,
good.
this
Like, he
is
look
a
like he know what he's
standout
doing.
Chicago-style pizza. The crust is tender but still has a nice chew, and all the extra fresh basil.
Like,
is
look
really
at
doing
all
good
that.
things.
Look at the
It
bread
alerts me
to,
why
like,
the chef
that's-
wouldn't have incorporated the caramelized cheese crust, maybe as a treat for back of house, but this is damn good pizza, any way you slice it.
I'd rather have this piece than any of the other pieces. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm probably crushing the whole plate, but shit could be better. Dude, look, this lasagna gonna look just like the same shit. Let me see.
Is that sausage?
I've never seen The
My mom made
Sopranos.
it with hamburger. See?
She made lasagna the other night. Delicious. With sweet sausage along with the beef. I thought Karen's was good, but
Sweet sausage in little pieces and a layer of basil leaves right underneath the cheese.
that's right.
That's Carmela's lasagna.
You're talking about.
Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to Binging with Babish, where this week we're finally taking a look at some of Carm's specialties from The Sopranos, the secret ingredient of which seems to be a layer of basil underneath the cheese. Curious to see how that works out. Today we're making both ziti and lasagna, so we need to make a lot of sauce. I got this recipe directly from the Entertaining with
just
the
a third
Sopranos
option of
cookbook,
sauce,
so
though?
it's pretty standard stuff. We need 1 large chopped onion, 6 cloves of crushed garlic,
Might be
and a
biased,
pound
but kinda
each
cool
ground
biased.
beef, and sweet Italian sausage casings removed, and of course a bunch of tomatoes. And since I need a lot of sauce, I'm quadrupling all of it.
Not gonna lie, I think I'm getting a win next UFC run, maybe 2. Maybe I won't lose pizza cake. How you wanna bet?
Stuff. Gonna have to
The
lose
girl with the
usual
curly hair?
Dutch oven
Why? What'd
here
she do?
'cause It's time to break out the big boy.
Why does
Into
it
which
fuck
we're
her?
gonna deposit a few healthy glugs of extra virgin olive oil. Bring that to a shimmer over. over medium heat, add our onion, sweat that guy out till he's soft and translucent, and then add our crushed garlic. Sauteing for an additional minute until fragrant. The recipe specifies then add our crushed garlic. Sauteing for an additional minute until fragrant. The recipe specifies adding the sausage and beef at this point with the onions, but that just doesn't make any sense to me, so I'm setting the onions and garlic aside and browning up our sausage and beef in batches until it's nice and crumbly and brown. Then I'm going to drain off most of the fat, add the onions and garlic back to the pot, and add our tomatoes. 4 28-ounce cans of San Marzano tomatoes lightly crushed. Add our brown beef and sausage back to the party, stir to combine, and then we're also going to fill one of our tomato cans with water and dump it into the sauce. This sauce stands to lose a lot of moisture during the 1.5 hours it's about to spend on the stovetop. We're going to cover this guy up and bring him to a rolling, oh boy, that's too much of a simmer. Easy, baby. Shh, 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 shh. Once your sauce is a little bit more calmed down, we're going to partially cover, reduce the heat way down low, about as low as your stove will go, and keep this just barely bubbling, stirring occasionally to make sure that nobody's scorching on the bottom of the pot for 1.5 hours, until the flavors are deep and sweet and melded and complex. Make sure you scrape down all this good stuff off the side of the pot too. It's essentially tomato paste, and it's going to help amp up the flavor of the sauce a little bit. Then, during the last 5 minutes of cooking, we are adding a bunch of chopped basil, as well as seasoning to taste with kosher salt and freshly ground black pepper. All in all, this is a totally serviceable Italian meat sauce. I can only think of a couple things that I would do differently. Those are adding a few tablespoons of tomato paste to the onions and garlic before adding the tomatoes, and letting the sauce simmer with both a Parmesan cheese rind and a whole stem of basil. Either way, we're going to transfer this over to another vessel because this pot is perfect.
I don't like how it's hitting the handle when you pour it.
Lasagna noodles in particular, because
but
they
it would have
can
been
be
hard
a
to
bit
pour it from any
finicky
other
to
angle,
cook.
right?
One of the central tenets of lasagna making is to make sure that you wildly undercook your pasta. You want it to be almost crunchy, which means no more than 4 minutes in the boiling water and then immediately removing into a pot or bowl of nice cool water to halt the cooking. Then, just like my mama used to do, we're laying these out onto a lint-free kitchen towel and setting those aside so as that we can begin assembly. Let's get our nice warm sauce off the stovetop, and then I'm going to use an aluminum foil lasagna pan so Janice can steal it and pass it off as her own. First, we're going to start with a healthy layer of sauce. We don't want any noodles sticking to the bottom of the pan. And then it's time to start shingling in our pasta. Depending on the size of your pasta and the size of your pan, some surgery may be required to fill in all the gaps, but no matter, just try to flip the pattern every layer to maintain the lasagna's structural integrity. Next up, the recipe calls for a generous spread of ricotta, a lasagna ingredient to which I am personally opposed, but who am I to eschew tradition, followed by a healthy grating, maybe half an ounce of Parmesan cheese, and then here we go with the layer of basil leaves. I'm very curious to see how this is going to work out, because not only does it seem like a lot of basil, I also see it causing cutting issues down the line. Carm then tops this up with a layer of thinly sliced fresh mozzarella cheese. Again, something I can't totally recommend because there's a lot of moisture in this and it might give us a soupy lasagna. Top that with another layer of sauce, and then it's time to rinse and repeat until we can't rinse and repeat no more. All told, I got 3 full layers, which seems respectable, and then on the final layer, we're just going to hit it with a generous coating of tomato sauce and a generous grating of Parmesan cheese. This is something I never really understood about old school lasagna recipes, which never seem to include mozzarella on top, which I think makes the lasagna easier to cut down the line. I'm also just going to hit this with a little bit of salt and freshly ground pepper. I don't think this is totally necessary, but I'm going to go ahead and pretend that it's traditional. Then we're going to cover this guy tightly with aluminum foil and place in a 350-degree Fahrenheit oven for 30 minutes. This is going to give the lasagna noodles time to finish cooking and get everybody melty and happy. Then we're going to uncover and place back in the oven for 15 to 30 minutes until it's browned and bubbly on top. And I gotta say, this looks exactly like how I always imagined Garfield's lasagna looked. So, whoops, wrong episode. Either way, we're letting this sit for at least 15 minutes before digging in. And as predicted, we've got some basil leaf interference here, but no matter, because this is a pretty solidly stacked lasagna. And as it turns out, there's absolutely no such thing as too much basil. I just kind of wish it was chopped up and mixed up with the ricotta or something so it's a little bit more evenly dispersed and less intrusive in my lasagna consumption. If you want to see the badass from scratch Brad Leone and Babish style lasagna, go check out my Garfield lasagna video in the upper right hand corner right now, because otherwise we're on to making ziti, the oft discussed but rarely seen Carmela specialty. First up, we're cooking a pound of ziti to very al dente, about 5 minutes tops, extracting into a large bowl and tossing with a cup or 2 of gravy. Give that a nice mixeroo, and then it's time to negotiate our cheese. Everybody who's anybody loves little chunks of mozzarella in their baked ziti, so that's what we're gonna do. Another aluminum casserole, because all this stuff is going to neighbors and friends so I don't die. Spread half of the sauce ziti over the bottom of the casserole, and then we're going to top that up with some gobs of ricotta. Again, I must object, but we are going for accuracy here. Spread that out as evenly as possible, and then sprinkle our half-inch chunks of fresh mozzarella over top. We are then going to top that up with a generous grating of Parmesan cheese, maybe ounce and a half's worth. The remaining half of our ziti, which we're going to spread out nice and even, make sure that none of that cheese is exposed to oxygen. Then we're going to top the whole thing off with another cup or two of gravy. Nothing is sadder in this world than under-sauced baked ziti. And lastly, another ounce or so of grated Parmesan until it looks like a nice light snowfall. And then it's the exact same process.
That should turn into noodles real quick.
Tightly with aluminum foil and placing in a 350-degree Fahrenheit oven for 30 minutes. Removing and unwrapping so we can expose all that cheese and pasta to the loving warmth of the oven.
If I win, I get one. I bet if you lose, you get a loss.
Until it looks like this. Browned and bubbly and crispy and saucy and happy. Now again, this recipe makes a perfectly serviceable baked ziti. I'm almost less opposed to the Parmesan only topping because we're scooping instead of slicing, so a crispy, crunchy top is actually nice and welcome. The sauce is delicious, the cheese is delicious, the pasta is delicious, the ricotta's okay. We got ourselves a winner and an obvious member of the Clean Plate Club. But can we do better? And the answer is yes, by simply flying in the face of all tradition. My first atrocity to use rigatoni instead of ziti. I like the ridges which help grab onto the sauce and little bits of meat.
Sweated by James Vicky. You're not beating me tonight.
Next up, the mozzarella. Instead of fresh,
I was punching back with a beat like a man.
This stuff melts up beautifully without pressing a bunch of extra liquid into our pasta al forno. Next up, and this is the really crazy one here, 16 ounces of cottage cheese. Cottage cheese gets super creamy instead of grainy when baked up, so it's going to be really nice. To that, we're going to add 2 whole eggs and about 2 ounces of grated Parmesan cheese. I'm also going to add some optional freshly grated nutmeg. This is going to add some really beautiful, nutty, old school Italian flavor. Give that a cursory mix together, and then comes the basil, chopped up into little bite-sized pieces to maximize both flavor and mouth convenience. Add that to our cheese mixer, give it a good normal-sized whiskin, and then the final and I think most awesome element, a bechamel, which I think you could add to any one of the recipes today because it's going to make our end product super creamy and rich. Into a medium saucepan goes 3 tablespoons of butter melted, followed by 3 tablespoons of flour whisked together and cooked for 1 minute before slowly streaming in 2 cups of milk.
Bro, call that shit a saucepan, bro.
For an additional 1 to 2 minutes until a thick, creamy bechamel
mozzarella.
And then it's time to bring it all together. Into the pasta goes a couple cups of gravy, our beautiful bechamel sauce, and our cottage cheese, egg, Parmesan, and basil mixture. Give that a nice little mix until everybody's homogeneous and a little bit cooled off, so we can add 8 ounces of cubed low moisture mozzarella. Just give that a little mix until everybody's evenly dispersed throughout, and then evacuate into our aluminum pan.
That shit looks so
I've run out of things to call it. Make sure everybody's spread out evenly and top with 1 to 2 cups of extra gravy. And then I'm going to top that with half a pound of shredded mozzarella, which will hopefully melt into one nice even layer. And then I'm going to top that with another ounce of grated
You do not
Parmesan.
even have to put that shit in the oven,
that's too
bro.
much cheese, I'm going to go ahead and ask you to leave. Same exact procedure as before.
Mix that shit up, it'll melt a little bit.
30 minutes, take out, unwrap, put back in oven, 15 to 20 minutes.
Fucking
lightly brown,
up.
bubbly around the edges. And if you ask me, looking absolutely perfect. But you don't judge a ziti by its topmost layer, or a rigatoni in this case. Either way, this is the best pasta al forno that I've ever had in my 32 years. The pasta is perfectly cooked with an almost vodka sauce-like creaminess to it. The flavors are complex,
should be hot. I know
it's a good thing Carmela didn't
dog
make this
shit out of
ziti,
his
because
tongue.
otherwise Father Phil might have been a lot harder
it's not
to
even
get rid
steaming.
of.
That shit is
Next up,
smoking.
some of Artie Bucco's recipes
That
from
shit is still cooking
Vesuvio.
in front of him. That was good. That was very good.